Welcome to the Expert Circle, the podcast where we dive deep into the minds of the most innovative leaders and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Deb Dutta, founder and CEO of Kriya AI. Now, for those of you who are new, our podcast is a collection of short 10-minute expert talks with global leaders like Tiff today. Now, the cool thing is we'll take these recordings, feed it into Kriya AI, and instantly turn them into AI-powered microblogs with, consumable sections where you can easily take away some of these nuggets that we'll be hearing from our experts today. So, in this episode, we're thrilled to have Tiffany Hicks, co founder of See-Through Series, joining us to share her insights on driving growth in a highly competitive landscape. And so I'd love to just jump in by hearing from you. Tiff, give us a little quick intro about you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Deb. I am a co-founder of See Through Series. In conjunction with my business partner, Kaylin Lavali, who I believe also did one of these with you. We offer go-to-market as a service for early stage fast growth startups. So Kaylin's the marketing lead. I run point on sales and sales operations, which is really sort of what I'll be kind of focusing my insights on today. Prior to starting See Through Series a year and a half ago to help founders achieve profitability and capital efficiency at scale through growth, through revenue architecture and go-to-market strategy and execution. I spent 15 years of my career building revenue engines and sales teams for fast growth startups. So cut my teeth at Yelp about 15 years ago. I was in the first 200 to 300 hires, so very, very pre-IPO. Got my first sales team at 23 at Yelp, and was able to sort of follow the growth and journey of that business all the way through to the post-IPO phase. Then transitioned to Salesforce, and then have spent the back decade really of my career building sales teams from scratch, sales and sort of customer facing revenue teams from scratch for much earlier stage startups. So most notably, I spent 7.5 years building the customer acquisition, success, and sales arms for a healthcare fintech startup called Ivy, where I left as the VP of growth a couple of years ago. And at that time, when I joined Ivy, it was very Wild West, very pre-MVP, sort of pre-product. It's still a private company, so I can't exactly give away what sort of order of magnitude we were doing in terms of revenue and growth and those types of things. But doubling year over year on what we had built in the 7.5 years that I was there by the time I left as VP of growth. Spent a little bit more time with various stages of more later stage growth organizations, both in official and unofficial capacities, building sales teams, and recognized a real gap in the market about a year and a half ago when Kaylin and I started talking about how we wanted to focus our time and spend time impacting the startup world, and excited to talk a little bit more about some tactical and practical ways that we've been able to do that.
Thanks, Tiff. That's such a breadth of experience. And I mean, we're seeing so many ways where today, I mean, as a startup founder, a lot of startup founders actually come from more technical backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole startups are nothing without, having a growth and having a revenue engine. So
Right.
I would love to dive into the, kind of experience, but I would love to start actually with you've seen the breadth of growth at IV, at Salesforce, and prior to that at Yelp.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just kind of hear your vision about, the big picture. How do you see AI
Mm-hmm.
shaping the sales landscape, on a broader level in the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that what's really interesting is that at the beginning of 2024, Kaylin and I set out to leverage go-to-market tools, initially just as market research to see if there were go-to-market AI tools that could potentially put us out of business. As with any sort of emergent bubble, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace about the power of the technology, the application of the technology, and AI was not different in any respect to that. So at the beginning of the year, if you weren't using AI in some capacity, I mean, I remember when we were thinking about building lead lists, for example, we were still using static databases like ZoomInfo or PitchBook, which are great in their own right, but not as dynamic or not as flexible to really hyper target your go to market around these more narrowly defined ICPs. So with the advent of AI and the proliferation of AI, specifically in the go to market space, what I'm seeing specifically in sales are a few things. The first is people are starting to talk about demand generation being dead, right? And there's a number of reasons why people have come to that conclusion, but the primary reason is because demand generation is not it's not dead. It will never truly go away, but demand generation now is much more about demand capture and understanding where your qualified leads are, capturing them through things like signals and events that you can use AI to target and sort of indicate and raise notifications on, so that when a potential buyer is going through the buying journey, which is largely now self-led due to AI, you're able to insert really hyper targeted, very relevant, value based messaging, as opposed to doing the old sort of shotgun approach pre AI, which was, hey, we want to go after B2B VPs of sales in data security, for example. So we're going to build a list with ZoomInfo. We're going to set up some targets in or some static email campaigns that aren't being driven by things like LinkedIn posts or online blog posts or any other sort of like footprints or breadcrumbs that you can now collect through AI. And then we're going to we're basically just going to spray and pray our message, right? So now sales is, as a result of AI, becoming a much more targeted and almost scientific, I would say, research process before you're able to then insert the sort of human element, which I believe will always be there, which is the art of selling. And once you have that prospect's attention, how are you adding value? How are you getting them to engage? All of that is still very much the same, but the way that you actually capture someone's attention and sort of qualify them or generate interest in your services or what you happen to be selling, that is very much changing. And we've seen massive leaps in just the past 6 to 12 months since AI has become a more heavily leveraged element of go-to-market tooling.
Fascinating. It's really fascinating when you hear perspectives from experts, like vertical experts, right? Like when you're thinking about sales and going deep into sales, it's fascinating how there's so much to, I think, embrace at this
Right.
point,
Yeah.
right? There's a learning curve here. You guys are at the forefront of it, like even within your own business, right? Like within see through series itself, you guys are really embracing them. We've talked about this multiple times.
Hmm.
Maybe for some other founders that are in the journey or like getting started, right? Like, love to hear how you could share, like, how has AI impacted your business, given like some of the resource constraints, being a small
Yep.
business, being and so on.
Yeah.
So, like, some specific ways that your company has embraced AI.
Yeah, so we were involved in a panel on the impact of AI. We being See Through Series, just maybe a couple of weeks ago. I don't know. It's holiday time, so it was actually a little over a week ago in conjunction with Founders Bay. And we got to hear from some really great, go-to-market AI founders, and also got to speak to our experience um, of uh, of how AI is impacting go to market. I think the biggest question that we hear from founders, and this was something that came up right away, was where do you start with AI, right? So if we know that on one side of the spectrum you're not is no AI, which
Yeah.
is bad, It's AI is here to stay.
Yeah,
And as they say, it's not that, AI is going to replace sales professionals or marketing professionals. It's that sales professionals who understand how to extensively utilize AI are going to replace and
exactly.
be more competitive than the sales and marketing professionals who don't understand and take the time to invest in learning AI
Yeah,
at this point in time. But the first question is always like, where do you start if over here is no AI and over here is like full automation, like thinking machines have taken over and and the answer is that you just, like anything with a startup, you start with bite-sized chunks. And so ideally, and I'm ripping this straight out of my business partner Kaylin's brain, but you start with what are the things that I really don't enjoy doing, that I find that I don't have bandwidth to do or slowing down my productivity, and which a machine could actually do better, than even if I applied, my like even if one and two weren't the case, AI could still objectively do this better. And I think in sales, for example, one of the biggest changes that we've seen is at the beginning of the year, it was a little odd if you had an AI note taker in your calls.
yeah,
And now the expectation is that everyone has AI note takers,
yeah,
because no matter how quickly you can type, right? No matter how
yeah,
how capable you are at pattern matching, the proof is in the pudding. AI note takers are just absolutely better at
yeah,
distilling down key takeaways,
yeah.
next steps, high level insights from the call. And so we use those internally as well as for sales calls. That's a really good example. Another good example is with tools like Kriya, where we like previously would spend hours on manual intelligence, or prompting chat gpt to conduct sort of back end sales intelligence prior to a call. Or if we were doing like some sort of external facing event, we'd have to work with a designer, we'd have to distill down all of the learnings, like even if we had a template to work from, we wouldn't actually be able to build a page as quickly and as elegantly as we are with as we're able to do with Kriya. So just yeah, exactly, like shameless product plug, but it's things like that where areas like that where you're able to do more with less and be more effective than even if you really enjoyed, let's say, like if you had a designer background, right? It's hard. It's hard to compete with the AI solutions that are out there that are sort of out of the box. And
Yeah.
so I would, the advice in terms of where I see the most practical place for someone to start with their sales process is really with those key areas where either it's really time intensive, or it's not something that you necessarily enjoy doing as much, or it's slowing down your productivity, or the technology exists and it's just far more effective at than you on your best day, fully caffeinated, ready to go.
That's
And then there's progressions from there as well, but that at least gets your feet wet with leveraging AI on a daily basis, which I think everyone should get accustomed to. So
totally. And thank you for, like it's always helpful to you because there's a myriad of AI tools out there,
right,
right? So I think it's really helpful to understand day to day, right? What are the couple of things that, you guys have been using, and I know there's so many others, like there's Clay and there's so many more that have
right,
been super beneficial for,
yeah,
within your function itself.
yes,
So AI is powerful.
yeah,
And we know that, but it's not without its challenges, at least at the current state of innovation that it is at.
absolutely.
So, in your point of view, what are some pitfalls and limitations you've encountered, and what did like how do you recognize them and work around them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest, just for the sake of focusing on big trends, the biggest trend that we see founders making, and this is something that I saw in my experience as an operator as well, is that folks have a tendency to think that you need the tools first, right? Like that you need a CRM, or that you need that you need like a lead list, or you need like these tools are changing, right? So 2 or 3 years ago, it was like, well, how am I going to be able to run marketing campaigns without Marketo? Nowadays, it's different set of tools. Or how am I going to be able to come up with messaging for my target persona, or the sort of like focus account that I'm looking to penetrate at the enterprise level. If I don't have this like robust data from my LinkedIn Sales Navigator or Salesforce integration, and infrastructure, especially sales ops and infrastructure, can get very, very expensive. And that, of course, has an impact on the cost of acquisition, because there are hard costs like marketing costs, event activations, and things like hiring costs, and sales rep salaries. There are also these costs that can creep up on you pretty quickly, that also factor into your sort of CAC, or customer acquisition cost, relative to LTV, lifetime value of your customer. And of course, the idea is that some people, I don't necessarily think that we're there yet. Like the goal is to keep the sort of CAC to LTV ratio as low as possible. Some people think that in the next like 1 to 2 years, we'll be able to, or the market will actually demand negative CAC to LTV ratios, where you can leverage things like word of mouth with the customer, demand capture over demand generation, community building and ecosystem building, and various other forms of demand capture and growth that bring those costs down. But the fact of the matter is that before you have your motion figured out, there's no point in doing anything other than understanding and educating yourself on what is possible. So using the example from 3 years ago, like it was always a red flag when I was a hiring manager. If a foundational sales hire would say, if I asked them hypothetically day one, like what are you evaluating? And the expectation was like, oh, well, you're going to have like a CRM set up, right? And you're going to have a Marketo admin set up. And these are like an enterprise CRM seat for that's tens of $1,000s a year per user.
Yeah.
A Marketo subscription is tens of $1,000s per year. An administrator for Marketo is tens of $1,000s per year. And this is before we're even talking about like, how are you going to penetrate the account? How are you going to get to revenue? So the same pitfall, I think it's just the same mentality, just applied to a new technology, which is, let's use Clay, for example. Clay is, I've heard Clay being described as sort of like the Salesforce of go-to-market AI. Having worked at Salesforce, I think that's a very apt explanation. It is cutting edge and very attention getting, because you can literally do anything with Clay. But it's also incredibly hard to wrap your head around how to use Clay, because you can do anything with Clay, right? And so if before Kaylin and I had exhausted all of the you know, lower paying sort of like entry level, like subscription avenues, me being the sort of ops lead of the business, there was absolutely no way that we were even going to broach higher ticket subscription tools like Clay.
Yeah.
And so I think that a common pitfall to avoid is, just because AI exists, and just because AI can now do what would normally require 50 interns like 6 months to do, doesn't mean that you should do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like the fundamentals are still the fundamentals, and those are things that you can still do quite inexpensively. So for example, making sure that you understand and have like a top 3 to top 4 list of who your ICP is, what your core brand messaging is, like what all of the sort of ingredients are to the cake, before you actually even start taking out like the mixer and the measuring cups, and like make sure that you have like flour if you want to bake a cake.
Yeah,
before you actually start talking about this, like,
totally.
like triple decker cake that you're going to make, right?
Yeah,
And so in in that regard, the fundamentals are still, they're not going away. And all that will happen if you try to replace the fundamentals with AI before your business, a good sort of rule of thumb is my business outgrowing like Google? Like,
yeah,
am I outgrowing Gmail?
yes,
Right? Am I outgrowing Google Sheets? Like, am I having to flip through 5 different sheets before I'm able to figure out where this lead came from? Okay, it's time for a CRM,
yeah,
right? So those types of things are important, but like identifying, is this a qualified lead? That work has to come before you implement the CRM, before you go and invest in Clay and put together a list of 2,000 leads of the same type and flavor, before you know which types of signals. So understanding your customer, doing customer interviews, getting the voice of the customer down, and making sure that you have an early stage, if you're product driven, like that you have an early stage MVP that addresses the unique needs of a very narrow ICP. That still needs to be done before you can leverage AI to augment your outbound motions and your customer facing sales motions.
it's super. I think that's such an important, important takeaway. And I keep reminding, when I have these conversations with folks within the founder community, right?
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing for us is the same, right? Like we're strapped for resources, and
Yes.
we have so little, but we are chasing growth.
Right.
So we get attracted. It's almost like a child, right? We get
Yes.
attracted to this shiny object that has this
Yes.
promise.
Absolutely.
And AI tools today are that, they're promising the world. And to an extent, I think it's literally a function of what you put in is what you get out.
Yep.
Equivalent to how much money you can spend is
Yes.
basically the output you will get.
Right.
Not all of us need that level of output, and hence
Exactly.
not all of us need to put in the input. So it's really helpful to caution, especially founders and the community that you serve as well at today, is to really balance out first, like you said, the fundamentals are, if you have a repeatable motion for anything that
Right.
you're doing, whether it's a marketing campaign or whether it's like an event campaign or it's a sales
Right.
campaign, if you've discovered, going from 0 to 1 and 1 to 10, and
Yeah.
maybe even 10 to 100,
Right.
maybe that's a point to think about how do you scale this.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I think that that's absolutely right. I think about the CEO that I worked underneath at Ivy, and her very uh, sort of practical. She's quite a talented marketer, in addition to being a very talented chief executive. And her practical way of describing it was, Tiff, let's say that tomorrow we have this like completely like this perfect instance of Marketo, and we have this perfect instance of Salesforce. Like, what are we going to feed into the machine? Right? Like, who are we going to who are we going to point it at?
Yeah.
And if you don't have those questions, and then you don't know, like, for every X, like, let's forget about the cost for a moment. Like, if I put in 100 leads, how many deals or how much pipeline am I going to get out at the end?
Yeah.
Or like, if I convert X percentage of my top of funnel into customers, how many of those am I going to am I going to retain? Like, how
Yeah.
many of them? How sticky is my product?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how sort of well entrenched is my competitive moat? Right?
Yeah.
These are all things where you don't want to be busting on the scene with a non-stealth product. You don't want to go into a formal launch
Yeah.
if you don't have these sort of uh, these motions figured out, which require a ton of robust experimentation. And that
Yeah.
is where another subset of AI tools can be
Yeah.
quite effective.
Yeah.
But I think that, again, going back to common mistakes, a common mistake is AI is so powerful that people, especially the sort of persona and the personality type that you think of, that builds businesses from the ground up, like they're big thinkers, and so they immediately have a tendency to go towards like what is the like highest octane application
Yeah.
of this technology, and that's not usually the best place to start when you're building a business. So
Totally, totally. I use the same philosophy as every time we have a marketer or like we'll work with someone and like, oh, let's do ads. I'm like, no, let's not do ads.
to
If
who?
that's your
Right.
first like response,
Yeah,
yeah, you're not hired. It's
exactly.
like
Yeah.
amazing. Well, I mean, I've taken up so much of a time, Tiff. I want to have one last kind of like a closing takeaway,
Sure. Yeah.
just kind of AI in the future, right? Like, what's your advice? I know we've talked about advice and like pitfalls and so on, but like genuinely for, our audience through series, like seed state, Series A founders and so on,
Mhm.
right? What's your advice for those who want to integrate AI into their teams and
Mhm.
into their with the constraints they have? What is your advice to them?
I would, yeah, that's a great question. I would say, figure out how you're going to apply the AI before you build the team. Because one of the sort of core takeaways that we're seeing in the market, especially with these later stage businesses, is that certain sort of entry level sales roles, for example, are being absorbed into the job descriptions of these sort of more senior level sales roles. So, and that's for efficiency and like basically that's for capital efficiency and profitability reasons,
Yeah,
but it's also being driven by these sort of trends in the marketplace that folks don't quite necessarily understand, right? Like Elon Musk is firing people left and right, and therefore I, as a tech executive, should do the same. But like, what's the operational plan behind that?
yeah,
And so I think that having AI drive your team design as opposed to designing your team and then finish and figuring out like what the metrics are going to be, it should be more of a push pull. And
yeah,
so what we specialize, it's where we really find that we have the most impact with seed level, Series A level, and even some Series B level businesses that have already hired a head of sales at Seed through Series is that we the I don't think that it is a it's a coincidence that the sort of rise of AI has also been paralleled by the rise of this fractional model,
yeah,
and that's all happened with the foundation of capital efficiency and scarcity of investment capital. I think that all of those trends are kind of working together to create a different level of expectations around as a founder, not just are you leveraging those sort of forces and kind of market elements to achieve more with less at your organization, but then do you also have a deeper understanding of your data at an earlier stage than was previously expected of startup founders? And I don't mean like proprietary data, I mean like conversion data, funnel data, like performance metrics, like data around what fuels the revenue side of the house and how that translates into the development of your go to market and product roadmap. So I would say that if as a seed level or Series A founder, you're thinking about how to sort of find this happy nexus point between AI and team design. I would I'm biased here, but I would start with a fractional or sort of like as a service organization like See Through Series to help you understand what the current landscape is and what the possibilities are, just so that you're making an intelligent decision and you're not leveraging we've moved away from growth at any cost, but in some ways the playbook for team development is still very much following this growth at any cost model, which I think we're going to see that change quite rapidly as more and more organizations unfortunately fail as a result of that. And the model that I'm talking about is, if I hire a head of sales
yeah,
who has experience at Oracle, or if I hire a head of sales who, has this really illustrious career at like a Fortune 500 or like a big tech company, never mind that they haven't built a sales team from the ground up before, but like if I have someone with like a really solid pedigree and then they bring their six most performance sellers, none of whom have operated in a lean startup environment either, then the sales are just somehow going to mysteriously happen,
Yeah.
right? And the problem with that is, number one, a startup environment, as we know, very, very different from a big tech environment. Number two, the tools and the playbooks that people have previously used are very quickly fading into the background as we see more intelligent design from AI coming to the forefront, and things like hyper targeting and trigger based and signals based marketing and prospecting being more relevant. So I would say, go through the experimentation process with like a contract firm or a contract to hire, fractional individual even. Do not make the mistake of investing a ton of capital in this sort of like static resource that's not tied to ROI, that's not tied to revenue. Get 6 months into it, realize that that wasn't the right model, do the same thing all over again, and then all of a sudden you're a year and a half into trying to figure out your go to market motion, and and you don't have anything, right? So I would say more experimentation, more flexible team design at the beginning. Figure out what those motions are that you want to scale, that you want to build on before you make longer term investments, whether that's in AI or whether that's like in like the next sort of generation of AI, or whether that's in like longer term hires with more equity, more skin in the game, with the business. And make sure that the people that you're hiring at that really crucial and critical kind of like experimentation period have a deep understanding of how to leverage AI at various stages of the business.
That's excellent. And I think that's there's an astute point there, which is I think we're it's about being an AI forward leader
Right.
before, and like also finding partners. Not everybody has to be part of your internal team, but it's also
Right.
about finding the right partners who can bring that kind of that strategic outlook on when
Exactly.
and how to embrace AI
Yeah.
in your team.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Like thank you so much, Tiff.
Yeah.
Like this
Thank
was
you.
incredible. I mean, firstly, seriously, thank you for sharing these invaluable insights with us. It's been an absolute pleasure learning about your experiences and your depth of kind of perspective on AI and the whole landscape that we're in. So before we wrap up, one of the cool things that we're doing here at Kriya is we'll be taking the transcript from this podcast and we'll be feeding into Kriya AI to generate an easy to consume microblog. So it's really easy. I mean, that's one of the whole objectives we have here is, there's so much of rich content that exists today.
Mhm.
How do we repurpose those to make it fun as consumable for the audience for educational purposes, but also to turn these into like brand opportunities for
Yeah.
organizations. So
Absolutely.
again, thank
All
you
right.
again for joining us today, Tiff.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, stay tuned. We'll be having a lot more of these really deep, in depth, inspiring expert talks on our series, and see you soon.
Awesome. I had a great time. Thanks so much, Deb.
Thank you.